Let the house of Israel say, his mercy endures forever. Let the house of Aaron say, his mercy endures forever. Let those who fear the Lord say, his mercy endures forever. There are a lot of names for this Sunday. Perhaps some of you, when you heard the Entroid Antiphon sung in Latin, remembered that the first words are Quasimodo. Maybe you thought about the novel and the Hunchback of Notre Dame, who, according to the novelist, was on this day left on the steps of the cathedral. This is also called Dominica in Albis, because for centuries it was the Church's custom that on this day, the 8th day after the Easter Vigil, the newborn, the neophytes, would all come to church in their white robes for the last time. Our Holy Father, much lamented, whom we miss oh so very much, Blessed John Paul II, decided that this Sunday in the Easter octave, the second Sunday of Easter, should have one more name, the Sunday of Mercy. And we know that in doing this, he was affirming the charism, the special gift that was given in prayer to his fellow countrywoman, Sister Faustina, now Saint Faustina. And the Holy Father, in writing about this decision, said to us that he understood that these special gifts that were given to Saint Faustina in prayer were meant to be a gift from God to help people to be able to endure what was coming in the Second World War. There was to come, while St. Faustina was receiving her gifts in prayer, some years later, the devastation that Blessed John Paul knew so very well from his own experience, seeing so many of his friends killed, coming himself so very close to being executed, having to live underground, as it were, in his seminary in Krakow. And then the devastation of the world after the war ended, continuing to be so cruel to Poland for at least 2 generations later. And so our Holy Father saw himself in naming this day the Sunday of Mercy. He saw himself reading the signs of the times, looking at this unfolding and seeing that God's mercy reaffirmed through the prayer and revelation of Sister Faustina. God was strengthening all of us to endure our trials. And what the Holy Father said, his judgment, is in fact confirmed by the liturgy itself, by sacred Scripture. Every day this week has the liturgy not in some way prayed Psalm 118, the psalm with which I began my preaching. And in that psalm, the Church has the verse that helped her from the very beginning understand the Lord's resurrection. The stone which the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. This is the meaning of the resurrection, and whenever Christians pray that psalm, we know that it was through the psalmist the prophecy that Christ would rise from the dead. But in praying that psalm, the Christian community takes up the words of the psalmist, "Let those who fear the Lord say, his mercy endures forever." Which is to say that the Church understands that the resurrection of Jesus Christ is the full and final manifestation of the mercy of God. And so for us, it is worthwhile here today at St. Joseph Church to think for a moment about how the Paschal Christ our Paschal Lamb, is the fruit of the mercy of God. The flowering, the full flowering of divine mercy in our world is Jesus Christ risen from the dead. And so to think about his resurrection as the blossoming of mercy is a way for us to understand what his Passover is and why the Father raised him from the dead. When we speak of mercy, what do we mean? St. Thomas Aquinas tells us we need to listen to St. Augustine on this point. St. Augustine makes 3 points about mercy. You might say he identifies 3 elements that are essential for the being, for the existence of mercy. First of all, mercy, Augustine says, is a heartfelt sympathy. It's almost a kind of grief. Second point, for another's distress, a sympathy for the evil that another is enduring. And thirdly, this sympathy for what another endures impels one to come to the aid of our neighbor. In meditating on this and thinking about this, St. Thomas says then there are 2 essential dimensions, or we should better say foundations to mercy. First of all, it is a feeling, a passion, a sentiment based on recognizing the evil, the distress that another feels. A feeling of sympathy, a recognizing of this evil and being sensitive to it, because the other is part of me. I love that other who is suffering. Or perhaps because I recognize that the other is me, and soon I too will share in that evil, in that distress. The other essential foundation, Aquinas says, for mercy is virtue. Mercy is not simply a feeling, a sentiment. It is a feeling, a sentiment, a sympathy that responds by acting to relieve the grief, the distress that so troubles me as I see my neighbor enduring it. What is true about mercy as such is true all the more fully with the mercy of God. Throughout history, salvation history, God shows his mercy. In fact, this is the name that he reveals of himself to Moses, when Moses asked to know God's name and be witness to God on Mount Sinai. So, God shows us his mercy because we belong to him. We are his. God is merciful to us because while we are first parents in the fall, and we, every time we sin, turn our back on God and walk away, God never leaves us. He clings to us. He holds us. And so he is merciful. God, in fact, not only wills our deliverance, but God has made our affliction so much his own that he sent his only begotten Son in the human flesh. God now has a heart. God has feelings. God the Son is miserable, has been miserable with our misery, feels for us. And certainly, In his Son, Jesus Christ, God the Father has acted to deliver us from our affliction. He has taken our affliction, our weakness, even our guilt upon himself. And he has done the ultimate healing, the fullest act to deliver us from our sin. Blessed John Paul, in Dives in Misericordia, says that mercy is the face of God's eternal love once it has come into the world marred by sin. And so you see, this resurrection of Jesus, this Paschal Lamb, is the apex of salvation history. It is God himself gathering us to himself so that we can belong to him and be his forever. God the Father no longer needs to look at every cemetery and see that these are all lost to him because of death. But he has triumphed over death in the death and rising of his Son. And so you and I, we will rise from the dead by the mercy of God and belong to God forever, and never be lost to him, nor he ever lost to us. Jesus Christ has done all of this out of love, deep, profound love in his heart for us, not counting it too great a price to be scourged, crowned with thorns,